Welcome, Jerry Marzinsky, to Holistic Life Podcast. I'm very happy that I have the opportunity and the honor to talk to you. And I'm also very happy for our listeners who will be able to get more insight in something which I believe to be absolutely brilliant, meaning your research in respect to psychology, psychiatry, but also your discovery. So just a short introduction. You are retired licensed psychotherapist with over 40 years of experience, working with and studying the thought processes of psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutes in the nation. And you also are a certified MACE practitioner. And all of it, you describe it quite well in your book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, which I recommend warmly. I read it. And I have to confess, I had a little bit of a tough moment to go through the chapter where you describe the so-called treatments. Because if you take out the word describing your profession and you take out the word treatment, it's just a horrific list of torture methods.
Yeah, and this is what she's talking about here.
Yeah. So get a copy and read it because it's absolutely mind-blowing. And also it's a genius discovery that you made. So with this in mind, I would very much like you to describe shortly your discovery and how that helps people having mental health issues of the worst kind, actually, as you describe in your book.
Well, there were several discoveries made. The first of all was that psychiatry and the establishment weren't curing anything as far as mental health went. They were just merely treating symptoms. They weren't getting at the cause. They weren't fixing anybody. They weren't curing anything. They were selling very expensive, often toxic drugs. And the first time I was thrown into the fray was after I finished graduate school and took a job at one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals in the United States, if not on the planet. There were close to 10,000 patients there when I got there. And I was working for the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. So what we were trying to do was find the highest functioning in the state hospital, train them at jobs, and get them out of there. Kind of relatively low-level jobs, hairdressing, janitor, that kind of stuff, auto mechanics. So we had a vested interest in these people being able to function when they got out. It wasn't just, oh, train them up. They needed to be able to function and continue functioning. And what we were finding was that they would not stay on their medications. Okay? And some of the most promising of the bunch were schizophrenics, who had the intellect and the wherewithal to finish these courses, but they were plagued by voices. Now, psychiatry taught in school, in college, and they're still teaching it, that the voices were hallucinations, that they weren't real. And the impression I got when when it got started off in that hospital was the voices were just kind of like word cabbage. I mean, they didn't make any sense. They were just garbled, words. And that was one of the first things I saw that was not true. These people were carrying on lively conversations with their voices. They were arguing with them. They were fighting with them. They were speaking with them. They were carrying on long conversations with them. And it was like listening to one side of a phone conversation. You could hear what the person speaking was saying, but you couldn't hear what was coming back. And I thought that was odd. That didn't match what I was being, the impression I got from graduate school and psychology.
But what you describe can't be hallucinations because they are not coherent, they don't speak in meanings, they don't have an argument with you, they don't get back at you. It can't be a hallucination.
Yeah, it's and then nobody at that hospital was interested in what these voices were telling these patients. They were all brainwashed in college to or nursing school to believe that these voices were hallucinations. So they just went with that. They just believed that. One thing I noticed was that when the patients were listening to these voices, they got more and more upset. They were causing more and more problems. There was a one-to-one correlation between how much influence those voices had over them and how much trouble they were causing staff in the hospital. So I'm like, what's going on with these voices? What are these voices saying? What are they doing? Um, Nobody knew, and nobody there was interested in finding out. So I started asking some of the psychotic patients at the state hospital, what are these voices telling you? Well, it took about a year and a half to 2 years to figure out how to get that information out of them, because there's no benefit to schizophrenic telling anybody about their voices. First of all, the voices themselves don't want them talking about them. And secondly, the voices are telling them, if you tell anybody about us, they're going to think you're crazy. They're going to haul you off to a psychiatrist. They're going to fill you full of drugs and lock you up. Unfortunately, that's what happens. So it was bit by bit. It was like as I learned one little piece about what these voices were saying, I was able to use that with other patients and say, well, okay, I know this much about the voices. What else can you tell me? And the patient saw that I was more interested in learning about the voices than, because I already had information about them that they knew was correct. Now, at one point, psychiatry found out that I was asking patients about their voices. I was pulled up to the psychiatrist's office. The door was closed, and the psychiatrist was pissed off. He's saying, you will not ask patients about their voices. The voices are hallucinations, and by asking questions about them, you're just reinforcing those hallucinations and making the patients worse.
But this is not making any sense, because if you are treating a physical illness and the patient has certain symptoms, of course you want to ask questions about them so that you know how to treat that person. Why shouldn't it be different with the psyche?
Well, that's how they are. They are vested in believing that these voices are hallucinations and nothing else. Matter of fact, what drives paranoid schizophrenia is those voices. If you can get rid of those voices by any means, all symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia leaves with them. If you can talk them out, if you can do an exorcism, if you can starve them out, if you can get them out any way, the person returns to normal.
Did the medication work?
The
Because the
medication,
medication is treating
all,
symptoms, not the cause.
all that medication does is treat the symptoms. It doesn't treat the cause at all. So these voices they're spiritual entities. I learned that the hard way.
I imagine that you were also attacked because these entities, I can imagine they were not very happy that you discovered them and were able to drive them out.
No, they weren't happy about that at all. But I didn't want to believe that for decades. I mean, there's probably at least 20 years where I went trying to deny that these voices were any kind of entity. I didn't want to believe that they were demons or evil spirits. I was thinking, well, there's something wrong with their subconscious mind. And, but it wasn't a chemical imbalance crap. So there were a number of lies that were put out by Big Pharma and the universities to brainwash the people of this planet into believing that these voices and schizophrenia were a chemical brain imbalance that could only be treated with their toxic medications.
All right. Are there any studies to prove the chemical imbalance?
None.
All
There's
right.
a lot of studies to disprove the chemical imbalance. I even have some here. I can look them up. But it's a lie. It was made up by a drug company by the name of Eli Lilly in the 70s when they came out with Prozac. They knew it was a lie at the time. They didn't have any explanation for why their medications worked. They had no idea. So they had to make something up to make it look like, oh, we know what we're doing. So
Like
they just went
to make it like science.
to make it like science. So they just came up with this chemical imbalance theory. There was no proof for it. They knew it was a lie at the time. They had no evidence for it whatsoever, but they published it. And they're still teaching it in the universities today, even though it's been staunchly disproven over and over and over again. The big pharma wants to keep that notion, that lie going, and people believing that their medications somehow balance
The
this chemical imbalance.
imbalance.
You know?
Yeah.
But if you look at what's happened, this is one of the first things I saw. They kept touting this chemical imbalance, and I kept asking psychiatrists, what is causing this? What is causing this? The ones who were honest would actually say, we really don't know. But I'd say about 2/3 of them would say it's a chemical imbalance in their brain. And then I would ask them, well, what is the baseline? I mean, how do you know which chemicals are out of balance or by how much? I said, I've never seen you give a lab test. I've never seen you give a blood test. I've never seen you given any kind of objective test to measure what the balance of the chemicals are in the brain. There's 23 different neurotransmitters in the brain. Any of them could be out of balance if that was the case. They didn't know. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be, let alone which ones are out of balance. They have no idea.
Exactly. Because you have to have like a standard human being who is in perfect health. And that's the standard, and you measure after that person. Do they have such a person?
No. They don't know. They don't know what the chemical imbalance of the brain is or what it should be. So you would think if they were treating an imbalance, they would have some kind of test, some kind of blood test or spinal tap test or EKG or EEG or some kind of lab test that would take a sample of what the chemical balance of the brain was so they could readjust that. They don't. It does not exist.
Yeah, it can make an analogy, for example, with people having vitamin deficiency.
Right.
You do a blood test, you see what vitamin is deficient, and then you balance it. So it should work the same, but you say that it's none done.
It's a lie. It's a big fraud, among many others that they perpetrated on the population of this planet. So that chemical imbalance is a bunch of crap. Now they started out when antipsychotic drugs first came out. I believe they were discovered in a dye lab in Germany, and I think then they were extracted by the French. They wouldn't let them test them in the hospitals in Europe because the Freudians were in charge. So they brought them over to the United States, and they allowed one of the state hospitals here allowed them to use these antipsychotic drugs there, and that they were marvelous. They knocked out the entire population. You know, they just turned them all into zombies. They weren't causing problems anymore. They weren't beating each other up. They weren't beating staff up. They weren't throwing tantrums. They were all just walking around like a bunch of zombies. That was great. They loved that. That's what they wanted. So they could reduce staff. There was less violence. Um, Again, they were just treating symptoms. They were just gorking down the population, and that's all they're doing now. Even though these new neuroleptic drugs that they put out, all they have is just less side effects, but all of them are toxic. All of them cause permanent neurological damage to the brain and the peripheral nervous system with long-term use. They're actually doing permanent damage to the person. Now, that doesn't mean they're not useful, because I've seen a lot of patients in there that's the only thing you could do with them is just keep them drugged up because they were so dangerous. There were people I could not reach without the use of those drugs, but using them permanently, they're killing these people's brains. They're slowly rotting out their brains. And they discovered that with autopsies from state hospital patients who'd been on these psychotropic drugs for a long time. They noticed that all these patients who had died, who were long-term schizophrenics on long-term neuroleptic drugs, their brains were shrunk like walnuts. So they went, hey, we suspect it's the neuroleptic drugs, the people who were doing that study. And they published that. And of course, the big pharma and the psychiatric mafia went nuts and went, no, it's not our drugs, not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia doing that. The schizophrenia is rotting out their brain, not our drugs. The lab people didn't believe that.
But it doesn't make any sense, because if schizophrenia, it's a mental health issue, how can a mental aspect can shrink a physical organ?
Well, yeah, and it doesn't.
So
it's the drugs.
It doesn't make sense.
No, but that's what to them, it doesn't have to make sense as long as the public buys it. If the public bought that it was a schizophrenia, they'd be off the hook with their medications. They're making, I think it's 7.4 billion, not talking million, $1 billion a year selling these antipsychotic drugs that cure absolutely nothing. They're making a fortune selling these antipsychotic drugs, and all they're doing is treating symptoms. They're not curing anything. And they got us all believing that they're the only ones that know how to treat schizophrenia.
But again, if you just think for a moment, it doesn't make sense, because if schizophrenia is a mental health issue, how can a medication that is addressing the physical body, not the psyche, can do anything?
It's a good point. That's a really good point, because the voices are energetic. They're energetic entities. Thought is energy. Memory is energy.
Exactly.
Feelings are energy.
Emotions are energy.
Emotions are energy.
None of those are physical. So how can you treat something which is energy with something that addresses only the physical part? It doesn't make sense. You just have to think a little bit. You don't have to be a professional to figure it out.
Yeah, and then if you look at it, like if you got a magnet, a big strong magnet, with your physical senses, you can't see or detect that magnetic field. You can't taste it, smell it, touch it. For all practical purposes, it does not exist. But you get a bottle of iron filings and you put it on that magnetic field, and it will take a form. Okay, so what I started doing was studying these voices. What do they do? How do they act? What do they say? What do they tell these patients? And I really couldn't do that well at the state hospital. And even while I was there, I still wasn't sure what these voices were, but I didn't listen to the psychiatrist. So I got in trouble with 2 psychiatrists for asking patients what these voices were telling them. So I had to be very careful. I had to stay under the radar. I had to be very sparse with my questions, so I didn't, because the voices themselves didn't like me asking questions about them. That upset them, which upset the patients. So I couldn't really go full bore. I had to just put it down the first gear and get what I can. But what I got was patterns started emerging with these voices.
And again, if the main idea that schizophrenics have hallucinations, how can that be a pattern in different persons? They can't
That's
have the same hallucination.
Well, they can have similar hallucinations. The voices are similar because of these patterns. Okay. So what these patterns are like the iron filings of the magnetic field. Okay. So patterns started emerging as I was asking these many different, and there was no lack of schizophrenics at the state hospital. I had bunches of them I could ask questions of. Not all of them wanted to answer those questions. Um, they were very leery of us in psychology and counseling because basically what we were snitches for the psychiatrists. So we would keep an eye on the population, and if one of them started acting up or started losing it, we would have to report to the psychiatrist who would take them and drug them. Okay, so they didn't trust any of the psych staff. They would lie to psychiatrists constantly, say, "Oh, my voices are better," or they've gone away because they didn't want to be drugged more and more and more. So if they kept telling the psychiatrist we were hearing voices, the psychiatrist would keep drugging them until they were just slobbering zombies walking around like you know just like zombies. So I had to slow down. I had to be careful about the questions I asked, but I did keep asking questions. And one of the first patterns that came up was these voices were consistently negative. They never said anything good. It was always bad stuff. They were consistently negative, they were derogatory, they were insulting, they were abusive, they were destructive, they were liars. They would say virtually nothing positive.
But was this negativity directed to everybody or directed to the person hearing the voices?
Well, it was
Or
directed
both?
to both.
Both.
They didn't like anybody, especially they didn't like anybody trying to help the client. They didn't like psychiatrists, and they didn't like the patient. So they would tell the patient, "You're no good, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're rotten, nobody loves you. Um, people are trying to kill you. Uh, those people are laughing at you. You name it. Every negative thing that you can tell a person, these voices are telling these schizophrenics.
Mm.
It's constant, going on all the time. You're no good, you're right. It's a constant bombardment of negative stuff.
Have you
So
seen a movie? Sorry, I interrupt you. Have you seen a movie called Nefarious?
no, I didn't, but I've had it recommended. It's like
It is after I read your book, I saw first the movie, and after I read your book, it was like a movie made describing quite a lot what you wrote in your book. So I recommend it because it describes one case with a schizophrenic and a psychiatrist. And after I saw the movie, I had to go out and take a walk and be in nature and just gather back my energies because it's so real and you
well,
have direct experience of those. It's so real that I needed to disconnect myself from that and get back to this reality. So it's a
yeah.
very good movie.
Well, the same thing happened to me when they came out with the movie Exorcist. So I was working at the state hospital then, and with a girlfriend, we decided to drive into Atlanta and go watch The Exorcist. I was so shook up by that movie that I was in a trance on the highway, and I missed the turnoff for the hospital. I just totally missed the turnoff. I was so upset because it was so similar to a lot of the things I was seeing at the hospital. Very upsetting. So after that, I went, yeah, do I want to go watch Nefarious? I don't know. I mean, I've been living I've been living there for, you know,
Yeah,
decades. I've seen some pretty scary stuff.
but
But these,
you can recommend it to other people just to have a good idea, a very good
you
idea.
know what? That's probably a good reason to watch it. So the first pattern I saw is these voices were consistently negative. And I asked myself, I said, what holds them in such a tightly negative pattern? Why are they confined to only negative? Why aren't they random like all other hallucinations? So I've been working in the last 10 years of my uh, formal career. I spent working doing psych crisis in hospital ERs. So I've seen hallucinations. They don't look like this. They're all over the place. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative, some of them are neutral. So they're just all over the place. There's no pattern to them. This thing had a pattern. So that got my curiosity up. They were consistently negative. They were consistently abusive. The next thing I saw, a patient came in and I was asking him about the voices, and he said, they hate the 23rd Psalm. I said, is that true? And I said, tell me about that. He said, oh yeah, when I repeat the 23rd Psalm, they react like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. They can't stand it. I went, well, that's interesting.
A hallucination will never react.
Yeah, why would a hallucination be anti-religious? So, I started passing out the 23rd Psalm to other schizophrenics I was working with. And I said, when the voices come, read this and come back in a week and tell me what happened. The voices hated it. Consistently among all schizophrenics, they hate the 23rd Psalm.
Again,
it's
if would
like,
be hallucinations, it wouldn't be the same reaction in all of them.
yeah, why would a hallucination hate the 23rd Psalm? Why would a hallucination be anti-religious?
And why it react the same in many schizophrenics?
Right. So I started doing a little bit of research on that, and I got speaking to all these schizophrenics, and I'd ask them, what happens when you go into church? And it broke down into 3 groups. If the voices were weak and they went to the church, the voices would shut up. If they were moderate strength, they would increase in strength. They would start mocking the preacher, saying rotten things about the Bible, asking them, why are you wasting your time here? They would get loud so the person couldn't hear what the preacher was saying. If they were very strong, they would actually drive the person out of the church. They would get up and they would run out of the church. They would drive them out. So I'm thinking another pattern that I saw that was interesting is that these schizophrenics would tell me that after their voices attacked them, they didn't have any energy. It was like they were drained of energy. And that was one after another after another. Now, they didn't at first realize that. They just went, oh, I feel bad. I feel bad. And you ask them, after the voices attack, how much energy do you have left? And most of them never thought about it. But once they thought about it, it's like, well, my energy's gone after they leave. There was one patient said, I can feel the energy leaving. It's like the voices were taking it. They were just draining my energy.
But it sounds like from an energetic point of view, these voices, they are feeding on negative emotions.
That's exactly what they're doing. So that's why they're constantly negative. They want to create that negative emotion that they feed off of. So they're parasites and they're feeding on us, not just schizophrenics. They're feeding on all of us. Look at what's happening in the world right now. Look at the world's in war. There's 600,000 Ukrainians have been killed. The Middle East is erupting. They're hitting all of us.
I am a journalist, among other educations that I have. And here, I live here in Sweden. I have been living here for 27 years. And at a certain moment, it was a newspaper that was run almost like a philanthropy. The man starting the newspaper called it Good Newspaper. And
Nobody was interested, right?
he was handing it out in the metro, in the subway, everywhere on the streets, and he was financing it through advertisements. So he contacted me because I run also a yoga school, and he was asking if I want to have an ad in his good newspaper about my yoga center. And I said, yes, of course, because I wanted to support him. I didn't really need to have an ad, but I wanted to support him. And then I said, I will contact you in half an year and I will have another ad. So, because I'm starting classes 2 times per year. So I said, when I start next round of classes, I will call you and I will have another ad. And when I called him in 6 months, he said, I had to give it up because people were not interested.
Yes, I've heard that before. Yeah.
So, and I don't watch TV, or if I open it, I want to see some documentary about health or self-development or stuff like that, because otherwise everything which is on TV, it's crime, murder,
Yes.
violence, aggression, blood. It's and also I noticed that the movies or the series that they broadcast, they are super seldom movies that are filmed in daylight. Most of them happen during night.
Oh,
For some,
that's interesting. That's because these entities attack most at night between 3 and 4 in the morning. They are most active. So they, you ask the schizophrenic, you know, how much energy do you have before the voices come? How much do you have after they come? So I did a little research deal on that, a 1 to 10 kind of subjective thing. And got a bunch of schizophrenics and asked them, how much energy do you have before the voices come? How much do you have it after they come? And then we did a statistical analysis on it. It was statistically significant. After the voices attacked and left, they significantly had less energy, statistically.
you also
So,
said something which is extremely important. You said that these voices are not feeding off only of schizophrenics, but they are what you described as intrusive thoughts. Would you like to develop a little bit the idea? Because maybe people who are listening to us, they say, I'm not schizophrenic, I don't know anybody, so what's in it for me? I believe that what is in for all of us is the fact that we are all affected by them.
yes. So, you know, where what kicked off my research was a clinical psychologist up in Northern California who was a Swedenborgian. I don't know if you know about Emanuel Swedenborg,
Yes. In
Christian mystic.
yeah, I've read some of his books. He was a Swedish, so Swedenborg. The Swedish people call him like that, Swedenborg. Yes, Arcana Celesta. It's a very interesting
Yep.
book. And also, I read the divine relationship or the divine couple, depending how you translate it,
Yeah.
where he tells about his journey to other dimensions and back.
Yeah. So he was a Christian mystic. He was Swedish. He was the chief mining engineer for the Queen of Sweden back then. He was a very well-known scientist. Probably, I'd say he's right up there with Leonardo da Vinci in a lot of ways. At the age of 50, Christ appeared to him and said, okay, I want you to get out of your scientific studies. I'm going to give you access to heaven and hell. I want you to go to those places, talk to the people there, and come back and write about them. So he went to heaven, he went to hell, and he talked to those people, and he wrote about what evil spirits had to say and what angelic beings had to say. And uh, Wilson Van Dusen, the clinical psychologist, he was a Swedenborg. He was also a he worked at a state hospital in Northern California. And what he saw was that the evil spirits described by Swedenborg were saying the same kinds of things that the negative voices that the schizophrenics were telling him. So unlike me,
but this is some 100 years ago difference.
Right. But the content was the same. You know, I bring that up in my book also.
And there are also the Gnostics who were describing exactly the same thing, and it is 2000 years ago.
Right. So Van Dusen was trying to learn about the voices by making friends with them. I knew they were rotten from the start. I saw them as enemies immediately. He was trying to make friends with them. So what he did, he actually got them to take some tests. He got them to take a Rorschach. So what he did is he said, okay, he said to the patient, I'm going to give you this test. You take it. Don't let the voices answer anything on it. And then I'm going to give a separate test to the voices, and you stay out of it. So he did that, and he graded up both tests, and he found that the voices were more psychotic than the patient was.
But of course, because a human being becomes psychotic because of the voices.
Right.
They are not like that originally.
Yeah, so he did a bunch of tests on them. He also carried on conversations with them. You know, they didn't trust him. They thought he was trying to kill them. But he didn't get very far. You don't get very far until you try to kill them. Then they show you what they're made of. You know, they'll throw everything in the book at you. They're energy, so you can't kill them. So what you were saying about them being energy is what psychiatry drugs does is they drug the brain, which doesn't affect these voices. So very seldom, if hardly ever, will these drugs get rid of the voices. They will just quiet them down because what they do is they drug the body and they drug the mind and calm it down at great expense in the long run. So the voices can't stir up as much negative emotional energy.
What solution did you find to somehow eliminating the voices or getting rid of the entities? How could you help people having these voices, deal with them, to free themselves from them?
Well, at that point, I had no idea really what they were. I'm just discovering the patterns. Okay? So knowing these patterns, this is the operational definition of what they are. So before you can do anything about them, you got to know what they are. Psychiatry doesn't know what they are. They have no idea. These patterns are like the iron filings. So they foster negative emotion, and that's what they feed off of. So that's why they're so nasty. They want that negative emotion. They want that person paranoid. They want him anxious. They want him scared. They want him feeling rotten. And then they drain that energy and just leave the person virtually lifeless. So they're parasites. And like I said, they don't just get schizophrenics, they get us all. So when something bad happens, your energy level goes down. Okay. So here's a number of other patterns that they ran, and I'll just go through them quickly because I'm not going to go through all of them either. They get louder after sunset. They get louder if they're ignored. So the psychiatry will tell them, oh, they're just hallucinations, ignore them. And you'd ask the patient, well, what happens when you ignore them? Every one of them would say they get louder. They will not be ignored. Okay. They foster self-destructive behavior. They get the person to attack somebody, to skip their classes, to do stuff that causes turmoil, that gets them in trouble.
Basically, what I noticed from your description is these entities, these voices, are actually inspiring the person to do everything which is not good.
Right.
So
And
they will hinder, they will stop the person doing something which is good.
right. They don't want them doing anything good or anything that's going to give them any pleasure. They foster isolation. They want the person locked in the room by themselves, talking to them only, and that happens a lot. It's the worst thing that you could do to a schizophrenic person is isolate them, because then it's just them and the voices. And what the voices are doing is they're trying to push the person's personality out of the way and take more and more control. So the more control they have, the more they can get the person to do screwed up stuff that will create that negative emotion that they feed off of. Okay. So they demand the attention of their victim. They're constantly maneuvering for increased control. They're gaslighting. They manipulate perception. They have access to schizophrenic's memory because they're energetic and memories are energetic. They can go in there and they can pull up every rotten thing that the schizophrenic ever did and throw it in their face over and over and over again to create that negative emotion that they feed off of.
But this is ammunition for them.
This is ammunition for them to generate loosh. Okay? They demand that the victim not tell others about their presence. They're consummate liars. They lie about everything. You can't trust anything they say. They'll promise you the sun, the moon, and the stars, and they won't deliver anything. Okay? They consistently steer the patient away from anything that might generate joy or happiness. They can manipulate feeling without speaking. They short circuit reason. They try to pace. This is very dangerous. They try to pass themselves off as the thoughts belonging to the victim. So I've had a number of schizophrenics who would ask these voices, "Who are you? What are you?" And they would say, "We are you."
But this is very weird, because if I will tell myself or asking that, I will say I am me. I will say it not we are you.
Right.
I will not use pluralis in the sentence. I will say I am you.
So this is one of the things that they get away with because from the time we're born, we experience thoughts in our head. So we believe that every thought we have belongs to us because it happens in our head. It must be ours. No. Swedenborg said none of your thoughts are yours. They either come in from heaven or they come in from hell or they come in from some level in between that. Okay? Your mind is like a radio receiver. You know, wherever your spirit is tuned, you will tune your attention to that area. So like if you're a criminal, you're listening to the negative come in. You know, if you're a spiritual guy, you're listening to the spiritual stuff come in. So whatever you pour your attention to, that's where you put your power. That's where you put your energy.
It sounds
So
like a radio with the tuning button.
right. But what the voices do is when the patient tries to change that tuning knob to listen to more positive stuff, the voices counter that, said, no, that's no good. That's not good stuff. When they try to do something good, they tell them, no, you can't do anything good. You're rotten. You know, you can't ever succeed in anything. So they keep turning the tuning knob back to negative stuff.
Yeah,
They
because
want them,
they want their food.
yeah, they want their food. They want it out of, you know, however they can get it. So if they can get the person to get in trouble, then that trouble generates that negative emotion for them. And I'll tell you, the prison is a hog trough for these things. They own the prisons. They are generating tons of negative energy in those prisons. And these people that go in there psychotic because they closed all the state hospitals, they closed them down over here. So now, how do these guys survive? They can't work. You know, they can't concentrate. They can't hold a job. The voices are pretty much running their lives. So they go out and they steal stuff or they sell drugs. They get thrown into prison, which is like hell on earth. They stay there 15 or 20 years. They're cold. Any kind of empathy is beat out of them. They become more and more violent, more and more psychotic. and then they release them out on the street with $50 and say, okay, you're free, you've done your time.
But also this, what you said, that they trick us to believe that those are our thoughts. This is really dangerous, because if I realize that those are not my thoughts, I can do something about them. But if I believe that they are mine, they will trigger all kind of, it will trigger an avalanche of negative emotions and shame
Right.
and guilt and fear
And confusion.
and
And yeah.
confusion.
And see, and psychiatry is doubling down on that. So psychiatry is also saying that these voices are yours. Your brain is broken. These are yours. So they're a big part of the problem. In order for somebody to recover from schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, and that's the biggest segment of them. So I want to qualify that what I'm talking about is paranoid schizophrenia, the people who hear voices. It's the biggest segment of schizophrenia. It's the most major. Millions of people suffer from schizophrenia. It's I don't know, 1 or 2% of the population. It's big. So if they believe that these voices are who they are, then they become them. They listen to what the voices say. They do what the voices tell them to
Exactly,
do.
they act upon it.
They act upon it, and then they become that. So that's very dangerous.
How
So
would you like to share how you are helping them?
well,
What kind of
well, one of the first things they need to
strategy?
understand is that those voices are not who they are. If they're going to recover from schizophrenia, they need to understand that those voices aren't their voices. They don't belong to them. They're a foreign insertion. Okay. So now they have something to fight against. They have something to push back against instead of themselves, because you can't fight against yourself. What are they going to do? In psychiatry, going, well, you're crazy. Your brain is broken. Just take our medications. That's what you do.
Or you kill yourself.
Or kill yourself. And you look at close to 50,000 people in the United States are killing themselves every year. That's as many as that died in Vietnam every single year. And no doubt it's these voices that are telling them to kill themselves. People don't just get up and go, oh, boom. They think about it. They hear a voice in their head telling them. And what these voices will say, nobody likes you. You're no good. You can't do anything. You're worthless. Why don't you're a burden on everybody? Why don't you just go kill yourself? Just get it over with. That's their exact words. That's what they tell millions of schizophrenics. Okay? And then you look at the mental health system and what they're doing about this. It's a joke. It's a complete joke. At present, there's more psychiatrists, there's more psychologists, there's more psychiatric drugs on the planet than there has ever been in human history. And there's more mental illness rampant on the planet than there's ever been right now. Okay. These prisons are overflowing. The state hospitals, the psychiatric hospitals are overflowing. The psychiatrist's office are overflowing. The mental health system is overwhelmed. Nobody's being helped with these drugs. An estimated 24 million schizophrenics worldwide, 24 million worldwide, and growing. The mental health population is growing all over the planet.
But you are able to help them.
Because these drugs aren't helping anybody. They're not curing anything. They're not doing anything. So suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the United States. In 2021, there were 48,000 Americans killed themselves, and it's increasing every year. Now it's up around 50,000. Between 2000 and 2018, the suicide rates increased 37% in the U.S. An estimated 24 veterans are killing themselves every year in the United States. 10,000 Americans are diagnosed with schizophrenia yearly. So it's growing, it's getting bigger. It's not getting any better. you got 50,000 people killing themselves every year. Something's wrong. This mental health system is junk. It is not working. It's not doing anything to address the problem. These drugs aren't curing anything. But they're making a fortune selling them.
Yeah, I know. You wrote in a book that you are able to help quite a lot of them, that you put together like a protocol or methods to be able to help them. Would you be so kind and share a little bit about it?
Well, there's some things they can do. Like I was saying, they have to realize that these voices are not who they are. Second thing they got to realize is, how do you tell the voice in your head, the normal you, from them? Because they sound just the same. There's no, when these voices come, there's no, like, for the most part. I mean, sometimes there are, but for the most part, there's no like, we are the voices and we're speaking now. It's not like that. They sound just like the tens of thousands of other thoughts that go through your head on a normal day. They sound exactly the same, except the intention is very different. The intention is negative. It's derogatory. It's stifling. It's nasty. It's destructive. It matches these patterns. So you have to be able to realize that not all your thoughts are coming from you. Now, Sherry Sweeney, my co-author in this book, she said, every negative thought that comes into your head comes in from the dark side. So the brain is like a...
But that's a relief, because the moment you realize that, it's a huge relief, and then you can do something about it.
Right. Then now you can take responsibility for the thoughts you're putting attention on, or you're paying attention to.
Exactly.
And what I do is, when I get a negative thought, I know it comes from them. I'll kind of, those flash grenades that the police use that blow up with a flash. I'll imagine a flash grenade attached to that thought and throw it back into hell and let it go off, blow it up there, and just send that thought back. And it doesn't come back. So you have to be careful about which thoughts you're paying attention to, because they're not yours, especially the negative thoughts. They want us upset. They want us angry. They want us paranoid. They're feeding on all of us, not just schizophrenics. So Sherry realized. Now, Sherry, my co-author in our book, she heard voices as a young woman, and they almost killed her. But she's an engineer, and she's like, okay, how do I make sense out of this? And she looked at the voices like programming her brain. She didn't want to be programmed in a negative way. So she also realized that virtually 98% of what these voices say are lies.
This is also great realization, because every time we, no matter who, every time we hear a negative thought, we can just say that's a lie. That's not the truth.
Right. And for the most part, that'll work. And it'll work for normal people too. When you all of a sudden get a negative thought, well, that's a lie. And like I said, they hit us all. I mean, I've talked to there's one time out in my backyard, I was here in Arizona, we don't have grass. There's not enough water to water grass. So we have cactus, and the cactus grow out of control sometimes. So I go out in the backyard with a machete and just chop them down to keep them down. And I was out there one day with my dog. I got a beautiful Alaskan, what do you call them? One of those sled dogs, big, hairy, pure white.
Mm-hmm.
And she's running around back there. Husky. Yeah, husky. She's running around back there, and she runs past me. And here's this voice in my head, just burst into my head, said, chop her head off. And I'm like, Where
What?
did that come from? That's not mine. I knew it wasn't mine, but it was upsetting, because I had the machete in my hand. And here's this thought telling me to cut the dog's head off, you know, and it probably wouldn't have been as upsetting if I didn't have this machete in my head. So you look at all these people who've killed themselves, 50,000 people, something is telling them to kill themselves. They don't just up without giving it any thought and just, mindlessly go blow their brains out. Something is telling them to kill themselves.
Yeah. But the whole story with the establishment is because they, let's say like that, put it like that, they treat us as if we are a bio machine.
Right.
No soul, no consciousness, no spirit, just anatomic biomachines with chemical unbalances.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's a very hopeless system. It's like, okay, your brain is broken. And they tell these people that's a lifetime sentence. The only thing you can do is take our toxic drugs. So come back once every month, and I'll give you another prescription. So you're paying for what, $200 for an office call, and they give you a prescription. Then you got to go to the drugstore, so you're paying the druggist for these drugs, and the cost is $800 to $1,000 for these antipsychotic drugs to remain sane for a month. I'm 60 miles north of the Mexican border, where I am right here in Tucson, and you go across that border, and you don't have to have a prescription to get psychiatric drugs. They're not abusable drugs. Nobody in their right mind wants to take these drugs. People in their wrong mind don't want to take these drugs. Nobody wants to take these drugs. They're not abusable. Even the people that need them don't want to take them. But the psychiatrists are, oh, we got our hands on these. We're the ones that are going to prescribe these drugs. We're going to make a fortune out of that, and we're going to make sure that nobody else can dish them out but us, not even the general practitioners. It's all money, 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 money. You go across the border there, you can get a month's supply. Instead of paying $800 or $1,000 for it, you can get a month's supply of olazapine or Risperdal for $75 versus $1,000 here in the U.S. Look at the markup on that these grubby, money-hungry people are making on the misery of the people who can least afford it.
Of course. The whole system is rigged like that.
It's totally rigged like that.
And it's also, I've noticed also quite a lot. I have been in the spiritual field for 35 years. And some of my students, when they came to me first, they were atheists. They were not believing in God. And then working with me after a while, speaking with them and appealing to their intelligence and ability to think for yourself. Till the end, they realized that, wait a minute, we are not just machines. We have a soul, we have a spirit. So if we have a soul and we have a spirit, it has to be something bigger than us. We are energy beings. So I was very happy when I read John Macy's book, Energy of a Mind. He was proving, and it's brilliant, I also recommend that book. He was saying that we are energy units. And
yes.
he said that he avoids saying that we are spiritual beings because people will react. If you say something about spirituality, then you will divide the population in two. If we speak with scientific terms, energy unit, all right, everybody will accept that.
Yeah, so the Mace energy method, I mean, like I've been in this, my entire career, spending on the front lines. And I've never seen anything work like the Mace energy method. Nothing. I mean, and I've been exposed to, hundreds of hours of in-service training and specialized therapies and EMG and all these different, behavioral therapy kind of things. I mean, nothing works like this.
No, because Mace energy method works with the cause. It's not
works
just
with the cause.
alleviating symptoms, it's going directly to the cause.
And that's what Mace, that's why he calls it causism. It doesn't seem to make any sense, the movement. Okay, it's causism. That's because it, like you said, it goes to the cause. And even though in a lot of cases it may not get rid of the schizophrenic voices, it will get rid of the trauma that these things feed off of. So it takes away their food. And
And
how
after a
much?
while they will go. I had, since I was a kid, I had a close relationship with my guardian angel. I came from a family where my grandmother brought me up, and it was, but of course, there is a God. There is God, not a God. There is God, but of course, we all have guardian angels, and of course, there are also the enemy. We didn't. My grandmother didn't even want to call it demons, the enemy. So she taught me a prayer, and I have a certain sensitivity, so I was able to start communicating with my guardian angel since I was a kid, and I continued. I still do. I still communicate. So I notice quite clearly when these other entities are trying to influence me or are trying to get at me by influencing the dear ones. Probably also experience that. When they notice that they can't do what they want with me, they want to attack me through the loved ones,
Oh yeah.
triggering some weird reactions in them, so that they will trigger a weird reaction in me because I am open to that person. So if people will become aware of the fact that we are much more than just a physical bio machine, we have a soul, we have a spirit, we are energy beings, it will be much easier to go to the cause of things than just to be at the surface of things and trying to alleviate symptoms and proudly calling that a solution.
Yeah, and let me let me quickly try to get to the part where, I what finally blew me away as to the fact that these things are entities is when I started seeing these patterns, I started doing things to interfere with them. I'm like, okay, what would happen if I started throwing wrenches in the machine and uh, see what happened? So I always had around me, and when I got a lot of research done in the prison, because I always had a group of schizophrenics who were hearing voices I was working with. We had an agreement that in real time they would tell me what the voices were telling them while we were in session. So I had a window into their minds, hundreds of them. And I could see how these voices worked and what they were saying and how they were reacting. So I started giving them homework, like, try this and come back and tell me next week how it worked. Okay? So I was doing something to interfere with these patterns that the voices were trying to implement in these people. And it was only a couple of weeks before they started coming back and saying the voices don't like you. They don't like you messing with these things. They don't want us doing these things. They don't want us coming back to see you. They don't like you. And one after another, after another, after another, that was happening. It's like they didn't want any interference. So then one day, one of them that I was working with for a good while, like 6 months, he stops in the doorway as he's leaving. And he looks at me and he says, "You know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you?" And I just look at him like, "No, I didn't think so. They're in your head. They're not in my head." I didn't tell him that. I'm like, they're stuck in you. They're not in me. They can't come out of there. Little did I know, at that time. So he just turns around and left, and I just kind of logged that. I said, "That's interesting. I wonder what that means." I didn't ask him. I just sat there looking at him like, "Okay, where's this going now?" And so a couple of weeks later, this same guy. So he's making good progress. I think it's the same guy come back and he knocks at my door without a pass. I don't know how he got into the medical unit, but he goes, I open the door and he goes, the voices want to talk to you. He said they want to talk to me personally. That had never happened before. It was always, they would talk through the patient. The patient would say, "Oh, the voices are calling you an idiot. That you don't know what you're doing and you're crazy." And I'd say, "Well, go tell them to stick their head in the toilet or something like that." It would be, through the patient. It would never be directly from
Exactly.
the patient to me. It would be like I was like listening in. But this time he's saying they want to talk directly to you, and that got my attention. Like that never happened before in like 20 years. That had never happened. So I go, okay, where's this going? They come on in, sit down, and sat him down, closed the door, and I said, well, what do they have to say? And these words came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. Boom. My head just went. That was it. My denial system completely collapsed. It just fell apart. And then he goes, I didn't say that. They said that. Those weren't my words. He was making it clear that he didn't make that up, that came from them. And it would have been dangerous for him to be playing a game like that with me if he was. That wouldn't have been a good idea on his part. But he was very sincere. And that was like a warning. And I'm like, where is this going? It's like they were warning me. In their opinion, I had no right to be digging into their business. But it took me a while to recover from that. But I didn't stop talking to these guys. And then I think that same guy comes back a few weeks later, and I had a book called The Voice of Knowledge by Miguel Ruiz. He's a Yaqui shaman, and he was talking about these voices also and how they were energy vampires. So I had a chapter with one page that I wanted this guy's opinion on, and it was talking about them being energy vampires. And I found out later that's the last thing they want the patient to know, that they're sucking their energy, that they're taking their energy. I didn't learn how much they hated that until I went to work in the ER, where I was telling some of these patients they're vampires, and then they would just blow up. They'd just blow up. So I started reading this page, and I got to the point where they were talking about these entities being guardian angel or uh, vampires, energy suckers. And as soon as I hit that part, this loud electrical crackling erupted behind my head. Just crackle, like just sounded like an arc welder. Crack, 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 crack. And I'm like, what the blazes is that? And then it started moving from behind my head over to my wall on the right. And it starts moving up the wall. Can't see it, can't smell it, I can't feel it, but I could hear it. And it sounded just like an arc welder, just crack, 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 all the way up the wall. And I turned at this guy and I look at him and he looks like a zombie. He's just staring at me with these weird eyes. And I'm going, he's going to attack. And I push my chair against the wall in case he tries that so I could kick him back. Because all they had in the medical unit then were female guards. They wouldn't have been much help. So I asked him, I said, do you hear that? And he doesn't answer. He's just staring at me. And so I didn't want to take my eyes off of him because I was thinking he was going to attack. And I'm trying to figure out what this noise is. So I'm kind of moving my attention back and forth really fast, trying to see what this was. I couldn't see it. And then it went up to the ceiling and went across the ceiling. Now, all this took, it wasn't like a very brief. It wasn't like 10 seconds. It was like 30 seconds this went on. And I'm sitting there going, what the blazes is going on here? And it then crackles across the back of the room, right over his head. And he's just sitting there staring at me with this laser look, zombie stare. and then it starts coming down the wall on the left-hand side, crackling the whole time. And I'm right near that wall, and there's a Rubbermaid trash can near my left leg. And whatever this thing was, it jumps into that Rubbermaid trash can, and it's crackling in the trash can. So I look over the side of my chair, and I don't see anything in there. But then, boom! Just as fast as it started, it just went dead. And I'm like in shock. And I'm looking at this guy, and he slowly gets up and he goes, "I gotta leave." And he gets up and he shuffles out of the office, and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, get out of here, go, get out of here." You know, I was relieved to see him leave, and I'm in shock. I mean, there's nobody I could tell about this. You know, the only person who knows about it was him, and I didn't want to see him again for a long time. Um, and I just sat the rest of the day. I was in total shock. My denial system was completely blown. I couldn't function. I couldn't see anybody. I just sat and stared out the window in my office all day. I think I took the next day out of work off because I was so shocked. Um, it took me probably, I think it was 3 months before I could call that guy back in to ask him what that what that was. So finally, I got the nerve to call him in. I put out a pass. The security brought him down to my office. He comes in, he looks good. And I'm shocked because I thought he'd be a wreck. You know, if they could do that and they were in him, I was thinking they'd just tear him to pieces. But he said, no, no, I'm holding my own. I'm doing what you taught me. I'm not making a whole lot of progress, but they're not either. So it's a Mexican standoff. So I asked him, I said, you remember the last time you were in here? He goes, yeah. I said, did you hear that crackling noise that went around the office? He said, yeah, I heard it, but he said, I'm surprised that you did.
But it sounds like these voices or entities, they are doing really hard work to go against the host's will.
Oh yeah, they're constantly going against the host's will. You know, so I asked him what were they, and he said that's them. I said, them who? The voices? He said, yeah, those were the voices. Now that really upset me because I didn't think they could affect physical reality. I thought they were stuck in their heads and they couldn't come out. Well, this is a whole different ballpark now. You know, if they could do something like that, the question became, what else can they do? And you know, that was even more spooky. And I'm like, I didn't have any cognitive map of where all this was going. There was nobody to talk to about this. The only people who understood or even remotely understood any of this were the schizophrenics themselves. I could talk to them about this stuff, but I couldn't talk to any sane person about this until I met Sherry, my co-author. Then I could finally had a sane person I could talk to about this because I couldn't talk to any of my colleagues or any other psychologists about this. You know, they just couldn't do it. I couldn't talk to my wife because she's like, well, you shouldn't be picking through the heads of psychotic killers in the first place. What's the matter with you? You know, I'm like, so she was out of the picture. So I'd get blasted by her. Um,
But
so
could you speak with those from Swedenborg?
did I what?
Were you able to speak with them from Swedenborg or Swedenborg?
Speak to the psychologist at that I was talking about?
No, not the psychologist, the people who were into Swedenborg.
No, I didn't tell them about this.
Okay.
This is I think this is just a little bit too much even for them.
All right.
So um, I didn't talk to that guy for about 3 months. And then after 3 months, my curiosity got the best of me. I called him back and he looked good, you know, and I was surprised. I thought he'd be a wreck. And I asked him, I said, what was that? He said, that was them. I said, them, the voices? He goes, yeah, that was the voices. And I said, well, what were they doing? He said, they were scared. They were trying to scare you off. I said, well, they did a damn good job of it. You know, I hadn't seen him for 3 months. And I said, you looked really weird when you walked out of my office. I said, what were the voices telling you when you left my office? He said, they were telling me to go to get a shank, which is a homemade prison knife, and stick it in your gut. And I was thinking, oh, he wouldn't do that. I've worked with him for 6 months and he's doing better than he ever has. He wouldn't do that. I said, well, why didn't you do it? And he said, I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one. I went, oh. So there was one time later after, let me see, was it before? It was after I got out of, after I left the prison. I was working in the ER and there was one psychotic gal that I had in my office. She was talking to me and I was asking her about the voices and all of a sudden she just stops what she was saying and she just says, "You're never going to get hurt." And I'm like, "What made you say that? Where'd that come from?" She said, "I saw a giant angel standing behind you." She said it was massive. And I said, "Well, thank God." And I never did get hurt. I came close a number of times. A lot of my colleagues were seriously hurt, several of them. One of them was beat so bad he had to go to the hospital, but I was never hurt. So that's what these things are. Okay. Now we're talking about mace. So these voices are energetic entities. And like you were saying, physical pills does not get rid of them. They operate in an energetic manner. You know, there is no time, there is no space, there is no matter where they're at. So no matter where the schizophrenic goes, they can appear there instantly because there is no time or space for them. The guy can go from here to China and the voices are right there with him. You know, they don't, you can't outrun them physically. They're energetic entities. So MACE is the first psychotherapeutic system that I've seen that directly affects them. Okay? So what MACE gets rid of is trauma, for one. I mean, because you talk to virtually any schizophrenic patient, and they've had a lot of trauma in their lives, an awful lot of trauma. And that's what these things are feeding off of is that trauma.
Yeah, it's the radio that has a certain frequency.
Right.
Because I can imagine these voices can try everything they know with a person who is happy, balanced, harmonious, spiritual, and strong. They will not be able to affect because that person doesn't have the frequency. They cannot enter the system because the difference is very big.
Or they wait around for something bad to happen and then they jump in there.
Exactly.
You know. So I even had one person suggest that they hang around the negative identities that we have. So the damage that is due to trauma. So talking about MACE, so it goes after trauma, right? So when you have a bad trauma, it hurts. It hurts for a long time. And they say, oh, time cures all ills. The reason it does is the ego jumps in when you have a trauma, a very painful trauma, and it takes it and it buries it in your subconscious and it locks it down. Now, it's no longer free. It's buried alive. So the effect that has is if another person shows up who's similar to the one who caused that trauma, it's going to cause that buried garbage to react. There's going to be a reaction, and the reaction will be usually a fight or flight response. You know, you're going to be told to either fight that guy, he's upsetting you because that's being projected out of you onto this guy. He's the one causing the problem, not this buried stuff you got in there. You know, it makes it look like it takes it and it projects it out there so you don't have to take responsibility for it. And it says tag that guy or avoid him or just get away from him. Okay. But what the universe does, it just sends you another one like that. So no matter where you go, this guy that you hate is going to keep showing up over and over and over. It'll be a different one like him because you're being told something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. You need to find it. Mace will find it. Okay. So Mace, it has a spiritual component. Okay. And that spiritual component is used to find where that trauma is buried. Otherwise, you'd never find it. And John Mace had a very hard time finding that particular component. And I think it was one of the last components of his system. So it took him in his entire life to put this system together.
The
And it
system is
was
absolutely brilliant. I have tested it with you, and I'm very grateful for that. And it really works.
why don't you tell them your
Wonders.
experience with it?
All right.
What was your experience?
So
So I did a Mace session
yes, we did a maze
on Georgiana, and I'm going to let her tell you about what happened.
I'm always, so when I find out about something, I want to test it myself. I had a friend who became herself a maze psychotherapist, and she suggested, she was telling me about it. She was very happy about it, and then I said, I want to test it because it sounds so good. I have to see it for myself. So I had a session with you, and you simply lured out of my subconscious through a series of questions a memory of something very unpleasant. And we worked with that emotion, that negative emotion. And it's simply, to describe it shortly, it's like a negative identity out of who is not me, but in which I have more or less consciously, mostly subconsciously, invested a lot of energy. And it runs like a subconscious program. Every time something similar to the situation happens, it triggers that negative emotion. So when we worked with it, I simply took back all that negative energy, like in an alchemical process, and it got back to my true self. And after it, I was paying a lot of attention. I even put myself in situations to trigger that. It doesn't trigger anything anymore because it's not there anymore.
That's right. It's gone out of your psychological universe.
Yeah.
Completely gone. Then regular psychotherapy won't do that. They just keep rehashing the damage over and over again, which makes it even it feeds it, makes it worse in a lot of cases.
Of course, you just put more energy into it. You make it bigger. And because you have to relive it so many times, you get numb. You don't feel it anymore and say, I don't feel it anymore. But it doesn't mean you got rid of it. It's like you are under anesthesia. You're still having, the cause is still there. And it will
Right.
get triggered again and again and again. And you thought that you got rid of it. So it's a good business to go to a therapists for all of your life, going
Well,
the same stuff over and over again.
and I've heard that from so many people that I worked with. They go, I've been every kind of therapist. I've been to the eye movement stuff, the behavioral stuff, I've been and it just keeps coming back. It doesn't get rid of the feelings that I have.
Oh.
And that's what they're teaching in the universities right now. They're teaching the same old garbage that doesn't work. And you're paying tens of thousands of dollars to be taught nonsense that does not work. And the same thing with psychiatry. I mean, their drugs don't cure anything.
No, it's like
And they want nothing to do with Mace. That's something that actually does work. This is a threat to them. There is a system now that is out there and does work. Now, even though in many cases, Mace won't get rid of the voices a psychiatrist or a psychiatrist, a psychologist, isn't that interesting? Won't get rid of the voices that a schizophrenic has. It will reduce the trauma that they have. It will get rid of that trauma and take away a massive amount of food that these things feed off of.
And
They won't be able to trigger that garbage anymore and feed off it.
yes, and when you start them, they go somewhere else because for
Yes,
them, you're just a piece of meat.
that's
You're not
exactly
food.
right.
So when you start them, they will not be. I noticed myself in a certain period in my life, which was very tough, they noticed. So they wanted to start eating up my energy. And I have my, because as I said, I'm in spiritual field since 35 years. I have my methods, I have my strategies. So I was just starving them until the end. They went away because they didn't get any food off me at all.
And that's the same thing Sherry did, the co-author of my book. She starved them with "That's a Lie." So if you know, they're consummate liars. They lie about everything. You know, very seldom will they tell the truth. But if they do tell the truth, they're only trying to weasel you, you know, to believe what they say so they can get more control over you. You can't trust anything they say.
No, and it's my technique, so to say. When these type of negative thoughts appear, I know that they are not mine. I know that these entities try to influence me. So I simply say I refuse absolutely and categorically to listen to you.
Yep. And if you just realize that they're liars and they lie about everything and you don't believe what they say, they can't get their grips in you.
Mm-mm.
You know, if you don't believe them, and you look at paranoid schizophrenics they're gone. It's like, oh yeah, somebody's watching me from the they're drilling holes in my ceiling and my walls, and they're watching everything I do. They believe that. The voices are telling them that, and you can't tell them otherwise because they're so fixated on that. As long as you believe what they're saying, they got you. But if you know they're consummate liars, you can't trust virtually anything they say. Then they don't have as much control over you. I remember one patient, the voices told him, if you gouge out your eye, we'll go away and we'll never come back. So he gouges out his eye. They show right up. They start laughing at him and mocking him, saying, "Now you're a freak. You look like you're ugly. You look like a freak. Nobody's going to want to be around you." They started mocking him and laughing at him, saying, "How could you believe us? So look how stupid you are. You believed us." That's what these things are like. They're very nasty. And um,
I noticed that the best antidote is really to do whatever in your power to feel good feelings, love,
yes,
compassion, whatever good feeling, if you can hang yourself onto that and don't let it go, they run as if they are under torture.
right. And I've heard a number of people that are somewhat religious. They say, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ." If you have a spiritual foundation there, they don't like that. A lot of times they'll just disappear with that. Um, but
But it takes
you
a lot of self-awareness and also inner strength and a lot of self-control because you have to be aware of your thoughts almost all the time and
right,
be aware of your emotions almost all the time. And then when you notice that you have negative thoughts or negative emotions, to have the strength to shift that,
right,
to change your resonance, to change your frequency, to shift the frequency button. So it requires awareness.
yes, awareness and the will to do it.
Yeah.
And the voices will do everything they can to stop the person from doing that kind of stuff. I would hand out the 23rd Psalm, and the voices would get them to lose it, to forget to repeat it. So they are an enemy. They're a very dangerous enemy, and they have to be taken as that. They're not a hallucination. They're not just air. They have an agenda, and that agenda is to destroy the person they're assigned to make them as miserable as possible. Now they will take the energy from that person when something bad happens. They're like sharks swimming in the ocean. They smell blood, they're going to attack. So if something happens to you, they're going to jump in there and they're going to go, "So look how stupid you are. Look at yeah. Who in their right mind would do something like that?" And they just start on you and start on you and start on you. You know, so they're trying to generate as much negative emotion as they possibly can.
But Jerry, if people will find out this, and this will be common knowledge, it will completely shift the whole system.
Yep, it'll completely shift the whole planet
It will help everybody.
to know that these things are real. But you know,
Yeah,
even the church isn't taking them on. You know, you look at most churches, it's like, oh, we're just going to talk about God and good stuff. We don't want to talk about the demons. It's demons that are causing the problems. You know, God isn't causing the problems. You're listening to demons. You
but
turn on
isn't
the
this,
TV. How many murders does a kid see by the time he's a teenager? How many murders has he seen on TV? And
yeah,
then these violent video games that they're pushing on TV also. You know,
yeah.
there should and these morons that they put up into the legislatures that are allowing this kind of crap to happen.
But isn't it their greatest trick to make people believe they don't exist?
That's right. They don't want you to realize that they exist.
Because the moment you realize they exist, if you are in your right mind, you will never, ever, ever want to listen to them and inflict that type of emotional torture on you and even physical damage on you. Because some
Right.
people that are cutting themselves or doing unhealthy things against themselves, you will never do that if you know that it's not you,
Right.
it's somebody influencing you. You'll never allow it.
Right. You know, I have a quote from Carlos Castaneda here. Let me see if I can find it because it hits this right on. Now, have you ever read any? You ever recorded any or read any of Carlos Castaneda's works?
All of them.
Okay, then you know what I'm talking about. I got to get my glasses too. Hope I have the hope I have this marked out to the right page. Ah, here it is. Okay, I'm just going to kind of read this because it stands on its own. So Carlos is talking to
Don Juan.
Don Juan. Okay, and Don Juan, he leaves this to the very um, last of his series, and he's talking, and he goes, well, he said, you haven't heard all the claims yet. Wait a bit longer and see how you feel. I'm going to subject you to a blitz. That is, I'm going to subject your mind to tremendous onslaughts, and you cannot get up and leave because you're caught. Not because I'm holding you prisoner, but because something in you will prevent you from leaving, while another part of you is going to truthfully go berserk. He says, so brace yourself. He goes, there was something in me which I felt a glutton for punishment. He was right. I wouldn't have left the house for the world. And yet I didn't like one bit the inanities he was spouting. I want to appeal to your analytical mind, Don Juan says. Think for a moment and tell me how you would explain the contradiction between the intelligence of man, the engineer, and the stupidity of his systems of beliefs or the stupidity of his contradictory behavior. It says sorcerers believe that the predators, okay, and the predators would be the voices, have given us our system of beliefs, our ideas of good and evil, our social mores. They're the ones who set up our hopes, our expectations, and dreams of success and failure. They have given us covetousness, greed, and cowardice. It is the predators who make us complacent, routinely, and egomaniacal. Okay, so he's talking about the negative forces in the universe. He calls them the predators. He says, but now they can do this, Don Juan. I asked, how? I asked someone how angered further by what he said. I asked, somehow angered further by what he was saying. Do they whisper all this in our ears while we sleep? Don Juan says, no, they don't do that. That's idiotic, Don Juan said, smiling. They're infinitely more efficient and organized than that. In order to keep us obedient and meek and weak, the predators engage themselves in a stupendous maneuver. Stupendous, of course, from the point of view of the fighting strategist. A horrendous maneuver from the point of view of those who suffer it. They give us their mind. He said, do you hear me? The predators give us their mind, which becomes our mind. The predator's mind is baroque, contradictory, morose, filled with fear of being discovered any minute now. Okay? Same thing with the voices do. They give the patient their mind. Okay? He says, I know that even you have never suffered hunger, he went on. You have a food anxiety, which is none other than the anxiety of the predator who fears that at any moment now its maneuver is going to be uncovered and food is going to be denied through the mind, which after all is their mind. The predators inject into the lives of human beings whatever is convenient for them, and they ensure that this maneuver a degree of security to act as a buffer against their fear. He says, it's not that I can't accept all this at face value, Don Juan. He said, I could, but there's something so odious about it that it actually repels me. It forces me to take a contradictory stand. It's true that they eat us. How did they do it? Don Juan had a broad smile on his face. He was as pleased as Punch. He explained that the saucers see infant human beings as strange luminous balls of energy, covered from the top to the bottom with glowing coat, something like plastic that is adjusted tightly over the cocoon of energy. He said that the glowing coat of awareness was what the predators consumed, and that when the human being reached adulthood, all that was left of this glowing coat of awareness was a narrower fringe that went from the ground to the top of the from the ground to the top of the toes. That fringe permitted mankind to continue living, but only barely. I think that pretty much covers it up.
Yeah, it does.
So MACE will work to drain the negative emotional energy caused by the many traumas we've had in life and get them out of your life so that energy is no longer frozen in your subconscious mind. It returns to you as positive potential. So people will say, I feel lighter, I feel freer, and I no longer react to the same kind of things that I reacted to before.
It is 100% true. I experienced it myself. I felt lighter, I felt filled with energy, and I told you I put myself in situations just to trigger it, to see if it triggers it. It doesn't do anything anymore.
Yeah, it's out of your universe. It's not there anymore.
It's out
gone.
of my system completely.
Yeah, it's a pretty incredible system. So
I recommend it. I recommend it warmly. Anybody who would like to see for themselves, to book a MACE session. And after that, I don't have to convince anyone anymore because they will be convinced due to their own experience.
So if you're thinking about going to a psychiatrist and getting expensive toxic medications that only treat symptoms, they don't cure anything. Instead, go to Causism Institute. It'll be www.causisminstitute.com on the web.
I will put all the links, both links to your web page and social media, and the link to the Causism Institutes in the description of the podcast, so people can access them directly.
Well, thank you. So MACE works.
It
unlike
really
all this other garbage that the universities are teaching. I mean, they don't know anything. I've gone from undergraduate to master's level, spent years in the PhD program. They don't know anything. They don't know how to cure any mental illness. And here's people spending years and years of their lives studying all this tripe in psychology and psychiatry, and nobody's being cured. That's the bottom line. If they're not being cured, what are these people doing?
But how can they do that when they treat the human beings as bio machines,
They
not as
can't. They
not as
can't.
an
We're
energy unit with the soul, with the spirit, with the consciousness, with energy fields. With how can you treat something subtle with physical stuff?
well, all they're doing is dumbing you down. So you don't feel as anxious. You're dumbed down. You're like a zombie. But people are only going to put up with that for so long. That's why they don't want to take these psychiatric medications. They make them feel awful. They have terrible side effects. They are toxic. Those negative side effects are toxic, poisonous side effects of those powerful neuroleptic drugs. And even the voices don't like them either. They're pissed off. They don't want these people taking those medications because it interferes with them collecting the negative emotional energy that they want. If the person is calm and not reactive, they're not being fed. I'm not saying those medications are totally useless. In a lot of cases, they're very useful, especially very violent criminals or violent psychiatric patients that are so far gone, there's nothing else you can do, or people that are just so far gone, you can't do anything else with them. But for the average guy hearing voices, that is not a good long-term solution.
I
Find a
really
MACE practitioner.
I really hope that the MACE method will spread. I already talked to some of my friends and they already booked sessions with you.
Oh,
So I
good.
will continue to encourage people to test it for themselves. I will not preach it. I always have this as a strategy. If you really want to see if something works, test it for yourself, and then you draw your own conclusions because you have your own mind and consciousness. So make up your own mind. But I tested it because I was curious, and now I am 1000% convinced, absolutely sure it works. It really, really works. And it's not the first thing that I've tested, but this really works.
Yeah, it's almost like magic as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I understand, what's happening at all the different steps, but it's there's a spiritual component to it that it wouldn't work without it.
Exactly.
No other psychotherapy has a spiritual component to it that I know of.
No, and this is why the others don't have magical results. Because these types of problems, they are not created in the brain. They have the source, the cause somewhere else.
Right. And that it's like a computer virus. I mean, that computer virus is stuck in the computer. You can't see it. It's affecting the computer, but you're not aware of it. So that's what a negative identity is that MACE goes after. It's like a brain computer virus that's affecting your life and has been affecting your life. And sometimes it started at a young age. Like people that I've talked to people that were like in their late 70s and 80s who found a negative identity that ruined their lives that happened back when they were 7 years old. And they decided at 7 years old because of something that happened to them that they were worthless and stupid, and they went on living their entire lives with that belief.
Yeah, I don't know of any of my friends who didn't have some type of emotional, I call them emotional wounds, coming from childhood in some form or other.
We all
Some
do.
severe, some lighter, but we all have some stuff that we need to get rid of.
In the MACE people, this was developed in Australia. They went to one of the universities there. They showed them how well it worked, and the university said, "Well, you turn it over to us, and maybe we'll promote it." They went, "No, they wanted the copyright."
Ah.
And the MACE people went, "No, hell no. It took us a lifetime to develop this stuff. We're not going to turn it over to you. give it to you. It's good too, because they would have just shelved it.
Yeah,
Then they went to the legislature, the Australian legislature. They showed them how well this stuff worked. They said this should be in the mental health centers. This should be in the state hospitals. This should be in the schools. They completely ignored it.
It sounds a little bit like the story of the electrical car, if you know it. When the electrical cars appeared, of course, people were very happy about them. And then the legislators made them almost illegal. So they were going at people's home, just seizing the cars, the electrical cars, even if they own the cars. It's a documentary called Who Killed the Electrical Car? And this was many years back. And now, guess what? Now when those in power and with money took hold of the copyright and everything that has to do with electrical cars, the electrical car is the new trend because now they are making money with it.
Right. And that's why they don't want this kind of stuff out, because it's going to interfere. It would probably cut down the psychiatric visits by 2/3. They don't want this stuff out.
Yeah, but it will come out because it will spread. When something works this well, it's impossible to just make it disappear. People will want it because they will feel the results. It will take a while, but it will go out. It will spread out a
Well,
lot.
that's what we're hoping. We're trying to get it out there as quick as possible.
I can only wish you loads of success with that, and I really hope that people will discover it because it's simply brilliant. It's the first therapy that I came across which doesn't want you to go through all the trauma again and again. It's even saying it's not good to do that. You don't have to experience it again.
That's what's interesting about it too. The therapist does not have to know what the trauma is. They don't have to know what happened.
And it's not that it's also something, but the person who experienced the trauma doesn't have to go through it again.
Right.
You don't have to remember how you were raped or whatever happened to you. You don't have to go through it again. It is enough that you went through it once. So for me, that's also something which is simply brilliant. You get rid of the cause of it and all that emotional energy that is blocked somewhere in your system, and you don't have to remember how it was. You don't have to go through it again. You just pull it out. It's simply brilliant.
It's gone. I know it's almost magic. I mean, it's virtually magic how well it works and how quickly it works.
It's not magic. It works that quickly and efficiently because mates really discovered the cause. And of course, if you eliminate the cause, everything that caused the trouble is gone.
Yeah.
So
he discovered something about the energy system in the human being, and that the mind, he said the mind isn't what we think it is. He said the mind only makes pictures of where you put your attention.
yeah.
Okay. So he was a ship captain, so he had to know about magnetic stuff. He had to know about electricity. He had to know about systems. And he looked at the body as an energetic system, just like his ship was. But the big thing that he needed to find was, where does the ego bury that trauma in the subconscious mind? And he found that the spirit can locate that under certain circumstances. And then once it locates that, then you can get rid of it.
And it really, really works. So I recommend it warmly. It's a brilliant insight and a brilliant discovery that can help no matter who a lot. So I hope that it will really spread like a fire.
I do too. I think it'd be good for everybody.
Yes. Thank you so much for taking your time and sharing with us a little bit of your story. I encourage to read Jerry's book and go. I will post, as I said, all the links so you can read the blog, watch the videos, read the book, and also you can read on the page of Causism Institute, because it's absolutely genius, brilliant, and fascinating what the Mace Energy method can do for us. Thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm honored to have you.